I've had the privilege of listening to Robert speak twice. He is a remarkable speaker, insightful, provocative, and compelling. I doubt that he would profess to know the future, but if there is anyone who can point us in the right direction, it is Robert. Robert, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Margaret. Thanks to the CMPA and BC Film and Media for bringing me back to Vancouver. I love to visit this great city. It's a real pleasure. I was here 4 years ago to do a talk about the book. Some people might remember. I see some people nodding. Thanks for that. This is sort of part 2 to that discussion. And so today I'm going to talk about inventing the future. One of the projects I've been working on recently is a show called Inventing the Future. I'm very excited about this show because I believe that it's given to each of us to create the future of our dreams. We have that possibility. It's a choice. So if you have an idea or vision for something that you want to go make happen, you can do that, or you can choose not to do it. You can choose to let that dream go away, and then you're going to wake up someday living in the future invented by someone else. So I always encourage people to get out there and invent the future. There's a scientist named Alan Kay, a computer scientist, and he said the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And that's such an empowering statement. That's always been my motto, and I encourage you to make it your own as well. On my show, we talk to scientists and technologists who are inventing technologies that'll shape the future of society, that'll really reshape the way we connect and communicate with each other. And so we talk about things like 3D printing, which you've surely heard about a lot. That's a big story from last year. It's now becoming kind of consumerized in a way that the desktop printer was consumerized in the 1980s. Some people dismiss it as a fad. They always do. There's always someone who dismisses it. And they say, well, you can just print these little trinkets, you know, like a chess piece or something. What's the point of that? How revolutionary is it? Well, I want you to know that 3D printing is used for much more than little plastic trinkets. For instance, does anyone know what this object is in the picture here? It's a jawbone. Very good call. So this is an anatomically precise jaw. They did a 3D scan of someone who needed a jaw replacement surgery, and they made a perfectly precise 3D jaw. They printed that, so then when they did that very painful, very difficult procedure, that patient was able to recover and basically have the same intact shape of their face and the use of their mouth and teeth and so forth. So that's a pretty significant step, but that's just the beginning of what I think is going to be quite profound. For instance, do you know what this kind of gnarly object is on the screen? This is a human liver. It is anatomically correct. However, the vascular part hasn't been perfected yet. This was printed on a 3D printer in Japan. Yes, they're printing human organs. Now, it doesn't work yet. I want to be clear. It will take probably 10 years for them to figure out how to do the vascular parts of this. But the point is that that's the trajectory that we're on, and they predict that within the next 10 years, you'll be able to print replacement organs for your body with a 3D printer. So that's quite an extraordinary revelation, and this is happening right now. This is not science fiction that I'm talking about. Does anyone have any idea what this is in this plastic jar? This is a new material. So there are also some breakthroughs happening in material science. This is called nanocellulose. It's derived from a tree, but it's reformulated into a transparent material that can be poured or casted or even brushed down to a surface. It is highly conductive. It can conduct electricity. It has ballistic properties like Kevlar, so it can resist bullets. It's an amazing material, and it's also a green material because it's grown from trees. And there are 2 plants in Canada and now a new one in the United States that are manufacturing this. So you may have heard about graphene, which is another amazing miracle material that's been introduced. It's still developing. This is also one, nanocellulose. And one more example, this is from the field of biology, and perhaps the most interesting of all of these. So the field of synthetic biology today is a radical transformation of that old science, because now biologists are creating new life. They are literally composing life at the level of the cell. They're programming cells the way we would program a computer. And so biology is turning into a computer science. They're programming DNA. And this field is called synthetic biology. So those are 3 examples of the kinds of things I talk about on my show. We get into all the implications of what might that mean, what might that entail for future society. The main trend here is that we are taking information, computer science, and we're turning that into things. We're literally composing a new reality, block by block, molecule by molecule in material science, or cell by cell in biology. So that's a big, huge trend, and it's quite a profound difference from the past. But that's not the trend I'm going to talk to you about today. There's an even bigger trend I want to share with you, and that is turning things, physical things, into information. And this is going to have a very profound impact on every person in this room. You see, whatever can become information will become information. That's going to be one of the bedrock understandings of how we proceed in the 21st century. Whatever can turn into information will do so. I got this lesson early on. Richard mentioned in his introductory remarks that I was an executive. I was a senior vice president of digital media at Sony Pictures. In fact, I was their first digital media executive. And so I was kind of putting that department together for them. They didn't have a digital media department before me. Part of my duties were to serve as a liaison to Sony in Japan, the corporation that owns the movie studio. And so I visited Japan, and I went to the research laboratories in the Shinagawa district in Tokyo. And this was in 1987. And when I visited one of the laboratories, one of the scientists there took my card. And you know, in Japan, they have that very polite habit of they take your card, they don't just put it in their pocket, they read it carefully, and they usually make some small remark. And so he looked at my card, he said, "Oh, Sony Pictures. You represent a great database of content." Yeah, that's my reaction. I was aghast. I was stunned. I thought, that's what they think of us? Don't they understand the glamour of Hollywood and movie stars and so on? They just think we're a bunch of bits on a server someplace in a server farm someplace. I was really stunned, and I thought, gee, maybe this guy has never been to the movie studio. He's never been to the lot. Sony owns the MGM Studios lot, one of the fabulous lots in Los Angeles from the 1930s. It's a beautiful place. He's probably never been on the red carpet at one of our movie premieres, so he doesn't know about the glamour of Hollywood and show business. And to him, it's just a bunch of bits on a server. So I said, all right, I kind of dismissed that. And I said, well, that's just a message from the Geek Club. And my takeaway there at the time was, well, this is why a technology company shouldn't own a content company. They just can't appreciate the grandeur of the content business. But that message stayed with me for a while, that idea that all we were was a giant database in the eyes of Sony. That kind of resonated with me a little bit, and it kind of troubled me, so it haunted me. I started to think about it more and more. I was like, well, what if he was right? What if he was right? What if all we represent is bits in a database, if that's all our content really is? What if we've been under a trance for the last 100 years, or maybe more? A trance that tells us that the physical products that we manufacture are where all the value in our content businesses lie. When in fact, the real value isn't in the physical product at all, it's in the ideas. Now those ideas happen to be embodied in a physical product, but we start to transfer the value to that physical product. Yes, I'm talking about books and film. Books and film, like think about this event that we're at today, books and film. A pile of paper bound between covers and celluloid. Can you think of anything that's less high-tech than those two materials, right? Like they seem so antique when I say it that way. Now we could have called this conference, the future of storytelling, transmedia or something. I know there are many conferences to that effect, but we're still in the habit, as a culture, not just the people here, but everybody in our culture is in the habit of referring to the ideas in a book or the stories on a screen by the physical property, as a book or as a film, celluloid. And this is endemic around the world, so we still have film festivals and so forth. I think we've been conditioned to think about selling the container as a proxy for the content. And this, I believe, is about to change. This, I think, is going to be the dominant theme for media in the 21st century. You see, the container is being shattered. As we transfer our content over to digital networks, as we digitize what we're creating, it's in the process of transforming our business, but not just our business. The content is freed from the confines of that container. It can run anywhere. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm going to tell you a little story. You may have heard this story. It's all turtles. It's turtles all the way down. So the way the story goes, it's like this. There was a famous scientist. Sometimes when the story is told, they say it's the mathematician Bertrand Russell. Other times they say it was the philosopher William James. But whichever the case, this particular scientist was explaining how the Earth revolves around the sun. He was in an effort to popularize science. And a little old lady in the audience spoke up and said, "Sir, I disagree with you." She said, "That's not how it works. The Earth doesn't revolve around the sun. The Earth is riding on the back of a giant turtle." And the scientist looked at her and he said, "Well, what's the turtle standing on?" And she said, "Another turtle." And he said, "Well, what's that turtle standing on?" She said, "Young man, you're very clever, but you have to understand it's turtles all the way down." For our business, for the media business, books, film, television, it's digital all the way down. It's digital all the way down. So very quietly, over the past 25 years, our entire business process has shifted over to digital. Now, we're still in the habit of mind, I believe, of thinking as digital as an afterthought. It's an ancillary, it's a separate thing. If you make a motion picture, you think about the digital rights as almost like the last step in the process. But in fact, it's the first step. The script is written on a screen. The budget is drawn up on a screen. All the deals and contracts are done on a screen. All the pre-visualization and pre-production planning is done on a screen. The actual pre-production, where they actually do the visualization for a big motion picture, that's done in digital form as well. All of the production has become digital. I know there's some holdouts who are still shooting on celluloid, but not that many, not that many. Most of this process has been entirely digitized. And of course, now our release and distribution and projection in cinema has also become digitized. And so if we choose to make a physical artifact of it, we certainly can output to film. We certainly can output to a physical book. But folks, that's an option. It's no longer the mainstream default process for our business. That's a big shift. And it's all happened in just like the last 15 or 20 years. So that is kind of where I'm heading with this notion of whatever can be information will be information. I believe that when you can kind of unzip that egg and take the yolk out and sell the two things separately, well, you've changed the business entirely. Let me talk to you a little bit about my experience with this. Back in 2000, when I left Sony Pictures, I started a company called Packet Video, and I led the team that introduced video on mobile phones. So back in 2000, if you can kind of backwind in your memory to 2000, you'll recall that mobile phones didn't work very well in those days. They dropped the call pretty frequently. And the idea of pushing video through that very narrow straw to a mobile phone, that seemed like a preposterous notion. And my job was to go around the world and convince people, TV people, people who owned video rights, but also the mobile network operators and the companies that made mobile phones. My job was to convince these people that this was going to be a business someday, and they thought it was ridiculous. They would stop me in my tracks, and they'd say, look, video belongs on a screen, just like music belongs on a stereo. Why do you want to move these things to a telephone? And besides, who's going to carry a television around with them? It seems like a ridiculous idea. So it seemed really like a big stretch, almost implausible back in 2000. I want to show you an example now that's going to illuminate just how far we've come in only 13 years. So recently in the US, President Obama was inaugurated to his second term as president. And during the ball, he danced with his wife, Michelle. And there were a lot of people taking photos. As you can see in this picture, you can see a lot of people in the audience who are holding up their smartphones and they're recording video. You may have seen these photos in the news because they were widespread. But you probably didn't see this next photo. What I'm about to show you is actually astounding because it wasn't just the people in the front of the room that were recording video. Every person in the room is holding up a smartphone and recording video. This is a giant shift. We've put the power to create stories and video narratives in the hands of everybody. This is a massive step towards democratization and the decentralization of media production. Mobile puts me in the media. Mobile makes it possible for me to tell these stories and share them instantly. And we're doing this. Everyone is doing this. Of all the people who own smartphones, about 1 billion people use smartphones in the world, half of them are sharing video and photos. We're sharing video by talking to our families using things like FaceTime for real live video conferencing on a phone. It's kind of a miracle, but we take it for granted. We're recording our family moments, riding bicycles on holidays and so forth. There's a service called Uvu that allows you to have up to 12 simultaneous people in a chat room in video. 12 people at once. It's popular with teenagers. If you're not familiar with it, I'm not surprised. It's the kind of thing that a teenager would need. Who else needs to talk to 12 people at once? But still, it's kind of amazing you can do that on your smartphone. We're in the habit now of streaming live video from rock concerts. When we go to an event, we stream it out to our friends, out into the internet. We strap little GoPro cameras on our helmets and our snowboards. People are using these when they go diving. They're using them when they jump out of airplanes to go skydiving and so forth. Amazing video produced by these, and very high quality. The new GoPro cameras record at 4K, the absolute highest quality resolution. US soldiers in Afghanistan are clipping cameras to their helmets and going out on combat missions, and they're posting the video to YouTube. You can find hundreds of these videos on YouTube. And if you look hard enough, you'll find video from the Taliban on the other side who are shooting back at them. This is unprecedented. There's never been an occasion where you can get a frontline view like this, and now we take it for granted. It's very commonplace. It's very normal. Many of the uprisings, the popular revolutions that have occurred in the past 2 years, for instance here, the Arab Spring, relied heavily on mobile communications for people to communicate because in those countries, video, television, broadcasting was dominated by the government. It was controlled by an authoritarian regime. And so mobile enables people to create an alternative path, to organize, to talk to each other. If you remember, there was a video of a woman named Neda in Iran. And this was back in 2009. And that was really the moment that really galvanized the world around the Iranian Green Revolution when they protested against an electoral decision. They rebelled against that because this video of this girl who'd been shot by security police on the street and bled to death in the street. The video was posted, it was watched widely. So a video can be very powerful for politics. It's not just about snapping family moments. And people are starting to expose government overreach and police brutality using these cameras as well. And so the mobile phone, the smartphone, represents an unambiguous threat to authoritarian governments. And we'll certainly record some amazing things as well. This was recorded just a few weeks ago in Russia. A dashboard camera in a car driving in a rural area, very distant area in Siberia. Russians drive around with video cameras in their cars for insurance reasons. They like to record what's going on. But actually, dozens of people recorded that moment where a meteorite shot through the atmosphere and exploded. Now, in the past, we might have heard about that. There might have been a news crew sent out a week later or a few days later to investigate. But here you have live video recorded by a bunch of people. And let me show you one more example. This is from Los Angeles. It's just so perfect that I wanted to share it with you. It's a little sillier. So we have this news phenomenon in Los Angeles where the police will be chasing somebody. It's a car chase. They don't drive particularly fast because it's dangerous to drive too fast. So everyone goes very slowly. And then the news helicopters follow along. So you have this grand parade through the streets of Los Angeles. And this happens once a month or so where you've got a live car chase happening. But if you notice in this video, at first it looks like you're watching TV, and then you'll notice that actually this is being recorded from a TV on a smartphone. And here come the police and the car chase right past the window. That is such a classic moment. It's like mobile puts me in the media, right? Like all of a sudden, I'm part of the production. I get to participate in this. Along the way, there have been some amazing things that have occurred, some amazing transformations. Let me share them with you. The first one is rapid scale. The sheer number of mobile phones. There are about 3 billion people using mobile phones right now around the world. There are actually more than that. The number is quite huge. And the number of people with smartphones is about 1 billion. You may not have heard of these apps. If you have, any of you raise your hands. Social cam, video. OK, great. So some people have. Great. Right on. That's great. That's great. These are social video apps. You may not have heard of them because a lot of people don't know what the point is. They sort of skew young. But what's interesting about these things is how fast the take-up occurs. So I'm going to show you an example of social cam and video. It's a hard chart to read from a distance. But what you can see is in a 4-week period, from April to May of last year, both of these apps went from 0 to 40 million monthly active users. 40 million people started using these in a single month. That's astonishingly fast. That's one attribute. This rapid scale is one attribute of mobile. Another one is that it unlocks a new dimension of value. And here, I'll show you what I mean by that. When I show this picture to television executives, I say, what do you see? And they say, well, I see 3 screens, a big one, a small one, and a really small one. And they then send their distribution salespeople out to go strike deals, to put their video on all those screens. And they're starting to make money with that. So they're now putting video even on the smartphone screen. That's fine, but when a disruptive company takes a look at this picture, they see something that the TV executives don't see. They look at this picture in a radically different way. You see, they see an invisible layer of software that connects all 3 of these devices together so that one device can be used to download, to browse, find, discover, download, and pay for content entirely outside of the pay TV infrastructure, through your mobile phone, through maybe Apple, or through someone else. And then, of course, an ability to beam it over to another device, to put it on the TV screen, and new ways to organize and browse and organize that content into playlists so that I can become my own programmer. I'm no longer subject to the programming control of a broadcaster. I can make my own TV network. And of course, there's also ways to use these devices to talk about the content, to share it, to market it, to communicate it and promote it, so that each of us can become our own kind of promotional word of mouth on steroids partner for the TV channels and shows that we like. So there are whole new businesses being created above this invisible layer of software, but it's almost unnoticed by the traditional TV industry. They're scrambling to catch up with it. They're not in the habit of seeing these things. Another aspect of this transition is decentralization. The idea that power has shifted from the programmer, from the network, to the end user. If you've used Apple AirPlay, you know exactly what I mean. When I visit a friend's house down the street, I show photos from my travels around the world. And he'll say, well, don't show me on your smartphone, just beam them onto the TV set. How do you do that? Well, you use the Apple AirPlay button. One click, it connects with the Apple TV device, and instantly your photos appear on the screen. It's super easy. You can do it with a movie, you can do it with music. It is super simple. Anyone can do this. And it's almost like magic, the idea that you can have the content here on your device, on your your smartphone or your tablet, and take it to someone else's house and then beam it onto their screen and show it there. It's an amazing new ability for us. Disruption is also a part of this, because typically the companies that are taking advantage of these new dynamics, they're not the traditional companies. So here's an example. There's been speculation that Apple's going to introduce a television set this year. But if you think of that Apple TV device, that little thing that's about the size of a hockey puck, that device can talk to the smartphone and the tablet, and as I mentioned, it can beam the content there. Well, then Apple can actually disrupt the game industry quite easily. You know, Sony and Microsoft are about to introduce new versions of their awesome game consoles. So those will come out later this year. But they may discover to their dismay that by the time they introduce it, they'll have lost a big chunk of their audience to a setup like this. Because this is like a virtual game console. Once you've got the game on your phone, you can beam it over to the TV set, and you can actually have two players. One could use a tablet, one could use a phone, and they can play against each other. This is essentially what's happening on a game console, except there's no console in the middle. The console's disappeared. And there's a transformation, not just of the business, not just of the content, but of the user, the person at the end of all of this. That person's changed by all these capabilities. 77% of the time when we're watching television now, we're using another device, either a laptop computer or a smartphone or a tablet computer, 77% of the time. And that's not just in the United States. That holds true in many countries around the world. Tablet usage is doubling in most markets, not just the United States. This is true around the world, the use of tablets. It's the fastest growing medium in years. So recently, the Hollywood Reporter ran a story speculating in great fear that in 2013, the television would become secondary to the tablets. I think that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but we stand today in the United States at 31% penetration in the household for tablet computers. So 31% of our households have a tablet computer. Of course, more than half of our households have a smartphone. And they expect it to be 50% having a tablet by 2014. So that's a really, really rapid take-up for that new device. This device changes us. We're no longer just consuming content when we get it in our hands. We become active. If you look at this, this is a little bit hard to read, but if you look at the part I circled, you can see that in the 18 to 29 age group, nearly 70% of the people use these devices to share photos and share video with each other. So we activate the audience. They're no longer just a passive consumer. They're no longer just a silent observer, but they are an active participant in a media experience. Every 60 seconds, we upload an astonishing amount of content onto the internet. 700,000 Facebook status updates, 200,000, actually more than 200,000 photos are uploaded to Facebook. They get billions of photos uploaded every single month. It's the largest photo sharing system on the planet. Twitter has 125,000 tweets sent. Google, 700,000 searches. And an astonishing 72 hours of video is uploaded every minute of the day to YouTube. 72 hours. That's incredible. In a month, YouTube has more video uploaded than all three of the big American broadcast networks have aired since they began in 1945. Every month, they get more video uploaded than that. And so we often, in our minds, as traditional media companies, we often think of user-generated content as some small thing off on the side. It's a little fad. It's maybe it's a trend, but it's not a big thing. You have to understand that there's an enormous amount of content being shared and generated over here, and it utterly dwarfs professionally produced content. So who you have to focus on, I think, if you're going to contemplate the future, is this audience that's going to grow up with these things. They're going to grow up and they're going to have a completely different approach, a different attitude towards media than any of us. You know, to this point, folks often ask me about the future of books. Personally, I think the future of the printed book, well, I think it's going to change significantly. Some books don't need to be printed. For instance, a dictionary or any reference book, frankly, belongs on the internet. It's much better as a database than bound in book form. It's almost instantly out of date. I think that's also true for textbooks as well, because that information is changing very quickly as well. This generation, when they grow up, they're going to have a range of choices that they're accustomed to that will simply be a completely different set of expectations than any of us grew up with in terms of how we approach media, how we respond to media, and how media responds to us. So my advice is, as you plan your business in the future, Make room for the 2 billion active users that are out there already, the 2 billion people using social media, and that number will continue to grow. It's pretty clear now that as the internet starts to expand around the planet, today there are about 2.4 billion people using the internet, and with mobile devices we'll probably reach a billion more, say 3 billion, 3.5 billion by 2014. It's pretty clear that everyone's going to be connected to the internet in our lifetime. And it's also pretty clear that every one of those people will be using social media. This is quite an extraordinary shift. Everyone has the ability to publish and share content now. That's a big deal. Those are huge numbers. And you need to consider how your business is going to fold into that. I think there's a lot of roles. If you have imagination, there are a lot of roles that you can cast your audience into. You can give them a meaningful role. When I worked for Oprah, this was the most important thing that she taught me. She said, people will do anything as long as you tell them exactly what they need to do. So you have to give them a role. You have to spell it out. I need you to do this. If you're going to be on this website, here's what you do. And you make it really simple. If someone wants to contribute content, great. Make them a correspondent. If they want to help participate in the community and groom the community, that's great. You can make them a community moderator. You can even ask people now to back your creative project as a financer through crowdfunding. You can solicit donations through crowdfunding sites. $3 billion was raised last year using crowdfunding, $3 billion for creative projects around the world. When TV people ask me what's happening to media, I tell them that the business is being vaporized. And I'm going to spend the rest of my talk talking about this concept. You see, when I talk about vaporized, I mean exactly, here's a ray gun, just like a science fiction story. You have a big ray gun, and in a science fiction movie you've seen, they shoot the ray gun at some object, and it disintegrates, and it disappears into a puff of smoke. And I think that's happening today, but you don't need a ray gun anymore. All you need is a smartphone. We're making things disappear all around us. See, for instance, with the smartphone, we've made the video camera and all that gear disappear. Now people can record video because they have that cell phone with them all the time. They can record just a click of a button. They don't need all this gear to carry around. We're also starting to make the TV set disappear. So something around 15% of the people who have smartphones prefer to watch video on their smartphone, even when they're in a room where there's a television. They like the personal experience, they like the privacy of it, and so on. I know, it's amazing, but that's what's happening. The resolution on these smartphones is equivalent to the resolution on a TV. So we learned in 5th grade that all matter exists in 3 states: as a solid, as a liquid, and as a vapor. Right? So the solids are very densely packed, they're fixed, they don't move, the atoms don't move around at all, they're very heavy, they're very dense. And in a vapor, well, the atoms are all spread out very far apart, they move very, very quickly. I think this is a useful metaphor for us. Think about that, solid, liquid, and vapor. Information exists in all 3 of those states as well. The history of the 20th century is the history of solid things. And we're very familiar with the idea of manufacturing solid stuff, like a book. There's information encoded in it, but the information is bound up to those atoms. It can't be separated. So that's physical distribution. Now, when things move into a digital network, I think they take on the attributes of a liquid. And when they move into a mobile network, they take on the attributes of a vapor. And I'll explain what I mean in this section. You see, in the 20th century, most of the 20th century is the story of massive investment in infrastructure, making physical things all over the world. Finding resources, extracting them, building huge factories to manufacture goods, building gigantic globe-spanning distribution networks, supply chains, ships, ports, trucks, roads, and big storage places, logistics facilities to store all those products that have been manufactured, and of course, billions and billions of consumer goods that sit on those shelves. So it's all physical stuff, right? That's the 20th century. Sure, we had a series of wars and different kinds of governments that came and went, and the empires ended, and communism started and faded away, and so forth. But a lot of that had to do with the control over the resources and the manufacturing. But the shift to this mass manufacturing society is really the big story of the previous century. It turns out there's some downsides, and we're starting to become acutely aware of the downsides of this focus on making physical stuff. Solids are very heavy. It costs a lot of money to move around a lot of atoms. You use a lot of gas, a lot of fuel to do it. They're very slow. Once you put those things on a ship and you start shipping them from, say, China back to the West Coast here, well, you can't turn that ship around if consumers' tastes change. There's not much you can do about that, and so we get into the habit then of having liquidation sales at the end of every season so we can make room for even more stuff that's coming over from China to be manufactured. And finally, solids are very wasteful. They're very inefficient. Most of the stuff that we buy in stores ends up in landfill, and 100% of the packaging ends up in landfill. So it turns out that solids, this physical stuff, isn't the most efficient way to get a lot of things around, but we're kind of conditioned to it. This is kind of where I started in the beginning when I was saying, gee, we've been in a trance for 100 years, thinking about books as the information in a book bound to that physical form, or the information in a film bound to the celluloid that it's on. I believe they can be separated. To me, the great tragedy is that all the information content in those physical products is frozen. It's in a frozen state. It's bound up in the physical process. And until recently, there wasn't a lot you could do about that. We didn't have the ability to change that, so we kind of just lived with it. We just put up with it. That's the way things were. But that started to change. We started to melt that iceberg of information and separate out the information layer when people started to go over to the internet. And by the time we got residential broadband in this century, it became quite prevalent to have broadband in your home. Well, then we started to ship that information separately, entirely separately from the physical products. We separated the two things apart. And we started to ship the information through a pipeline to your house at high speed at very low cost. And now information took on the attributes of a liquid. Literally, we became conditioned, within just 10 years, think of your own behavior, we became conditioned to expecting to get information on demand like a utility, just like water, just like electricity. That's a big behavioral shift for us. And it was a wonderful thing. I mean, it shifted a lot of our businesses, it created wonderful opportunities. It had some big impact as well. So far I've talked to you a little bit about the shift then from the physical distribution network to the digital distribution network, and how information took on the attributes of a liquid getting sent through this digital pipe. There's a big impact on our businesses, let's be real. Right? Folks in the publishing business, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Our industrial media businesses of the 20th century depended on physical media. Our business models were built around physical media. And as soon as we separated them, they had a devastating impact on us. It took billions of dollars to be in the media business. You had to make a massive upfront investment if you wanted to be in the media business in the 20th century. If you wanted to be in print, you had to build printing presses, you had to buy fleets of trucks to move newspapers around or ship the books around to stores and so forth. If you wanted to be in broadcasting, you need to have satellites and satellite uplinks and satellite downlinks and so forth. This kind of infrastructure is not available to everybody. It's like that old quote from A.J. Liebling, the editor of the New Yorker. He said, freedom of the press is guaranteed only to those who own one. That's changed now. We all have the freedom of the press. We have that on our desktop. We even have it on our smartphone. As a publisher, you also need to make a huge investment in physical media, the stuff that you put the content into. And of course, there was a huge amount of waste because we put packaging around all of that content as well. That all ended up in a landfill. Today, this has shifted completely. This is a picture of the latest version of the iTunes Store. This is Apple's iTunes Store. And as you know, this is a kind of store, but it's more like a metaphor for a store. It's not like any store you or I have ever walked into. It lives on an electronic screen. It's displayed on a screen. And it doesn't just consist of the storefront. It also includes all of the products. It's a whole database of content. It's the warehouse, if you will. It's also the marketing and promotion and so forth. That all of this can be delivered to you in an instant electronically, and it can be changed in an instant. So it's very, very fast. So you see that this has some of the attributes I was talking about. We're starting to make the shift towards a rather different way to package and present information. So in a way, we've done away with all of that physical stuff, the factory, the physical media, the trucks to distribute and so forth. All of that is done away with, and now we can simply send that information over the digital network to the device. This, so far, you're all with me. We're familiar with this, right? It's totally obvious, I think. There's one problem. That broadband system, you have to be sitting in front of the computer. It's just like plumbing. You've got to be sitting in front of your desktop computer. It's like having water in the kitchen, but if you need to water the plants out the porch, well, there's no water out there, so you have to carry a bucket. It was a little bit inconvenient for us, right? And that's where mobile fits in. This is why mobile is so important. It kind of completes the loop. It makes it possible for us to put the content that we want on the device that we want in the context where we need it. And so if you're interested in fixing your car, you can download instructions to your phone, and you can take it out to your car and have the instructions right there next to your car, where you never had your computer out there in the garage like that. So that's one example of how we're able to move the information to the right context. And people are doing that en masse. That's a big shift. And another big shift is one that allows us to cut the cord and drop pay TV services altogether. This is a gigantic trend that is really scaring the television industry. And so we are now talking about this transition then from the physical network to the digital network and now to the wireless network, where I'm going to argue information takes on the attributes of a vapor. It moves much faster. It's accessible to everybody. We share it all the time. So when I use this term vaporized, I'm talking about invisible software. When we launched mobile video services and mobile downloads, we had to cope with the fact that we had to educate everybody who bought a phone on the idea of downloading an app to your phone. It's such a weird concept, isn't it? When you download something to your phone, where does it come from? Where does it go? What did you pay for? You know, there's this invisible thing that came to your phone. You click the button and all of a sudden a new capability is there. It's like magic. It's hard to explain to people how that happens, how that comes. I think that our information businesses start to take on a completely different set of attributes, set of business dynamics, when information turns into atmosphere that's freely available to all of us all the time. It turns out this isn't just true of the media business that we operate in. Media was just the canary in the coal mine. Increasingly, I'm getting calls from companies, banking companies, financial institutions, governments, retail companies. They're saying, we need to know what you know. We need to have the experience and knowledge that you've got from dealing with this transition in the media business. Suddenly, our business is going through this as well. And so it's not just media that's being vaporized. We're vaporizing hardware. Sounds preposterous, but let me show you what I mean. 10 years ago, this was a smartphone. This RIM BlackBerry pager was a smartphone. It was smart because it included your email, it included your phone, it included your day runner. You remember that notebook you had, that big, thick leather thing you had to carry around with you when you went around town, and your mail. And so we've been able to kind of vaporize all four of those things and compress it down into one phone. And then as phones got more smart or more capable, we started to add in more features like a clock and a calculator. You didn't need to carry those around with you either. And then gradually, by 2005, we were able to include media playback, MP3, some rudimentary game functionality, rudimentary GPS systems, and sometimes we even put an FM radio receiver part inside of the phone as well, so you could replace all those devices as well. And then by 2007, when Apple introduced the first iPhone, the phones were powerful enough to replace the recording equipment. So they weren't just there to play back media, you could also record photos, video, you could play back video and music, and you could record your voice. So we were able to do away with all those gizmos. And if you think about it, life started to get pretty good if you traveled, because you didn't have to carry all those devices and all those electronic chargers and all the couplers and the power adapters and so forth. All that stuff could stay at home, or eventually you could get rid of it, all of it. Over the course of about 10 years then, we've collapsed the feature functionality of more than 20 devices into a single smartphone. We've done away with all those other gizmos. And the quality of the mobile phone has gotten so good now that you can really travel without carrying a camera, without carrying a video camera, and so forth. The phones now record in high-definition video. This is a giant shift. And by the way, it's affecting Japan. The consumer electronics companies in Japan are experiencing double-digit decreases in the sales of their consumer electronics. That's how hard this has hit their business. And now Sharp and Panasonic are in serious jeopardy. Even Sony, the greatest of the electronics companies in Japan, is in serious trouble now, because the mobile phone has basically eclipsed those businesses. You simply don't need to carry all this stuff around with you. The process won't stop. This is the year where NFC, near-field communication, will be embedded in a number of smartphones. It's already happening outside of North America. You may have seen it happening here in Canada. It hasn't quite come to the United States, but it's rolling out this year. Near-field communication means that you can do a secure transaction simply by touching your phone to another terminal. And it simply pairs it instantly. It's much faster and easier than Bluetooth if you've used that. I was just in Korea a couple of weeks ago, and I was standing in line in a 7-Eleven. Nobody stands in line at the checkout counter anymore. They simply walk up with their stuff, they scan it, they tap their phone, bling, transaction happens on their phone, and they're out the door. It's astonishing, and it's everywhere in Korea, you can imagine, and Japan as well. Also, things like our identity cards, our room keys in a hotel, our car keys, all of that will start to be absorbed into the mobile phone. So we're dematerializing the world around us. And don't forget, we're approaching rapidly a time when we have 1 billion apps available to our cell phone. 1 billion apps, and each one of those apps represents a business or a physical product that has been vaporized. You start to see this all over. Now, some people think, well, the future of mobile is all about smartphones, and I'm here to tell you that's not the case. So over the last 20 years, we've seen smartphones, the big phone, the mobile phone, shrink in size, right? It's just like a computer in the sense that it gets smaller, cheaper, faster, and better every single year. And so each year you get a smaller version that works way better than the previous version. If you think about that movie Wall Street from 1984, when Michael Douglas was walking around on the beach in the Hamptons and we thought he was so cool with his big hunky thing, it was the size of a bread box he's carrying around. That was a mobile phone back in those days. And look how far we've come in 20 years. Well, that progression is not going to stop. That progression will continue. So things will continue to miniaturize, which means that we'll soon be able to do away with the smartphone itself. That too will be vaporized. It'll be turned into a pair of glasses. These are Google Glass. I'm sure you've heard about this by now. Google Glass replicates most of the functionality of a smartphone inside a pair of glasses. So as you can see, there's a small camera up on the right side. There's a small touchpad on the right temple, and there's a miniature processor there. And on the other side, that person can see a little tiny screen, but at the distance it is from his eye, it looks like a screen, across the room. He can read it. He can read things And there's a number of videos on the web. If you haven't seen them, check it out. It's astonishing. This product will hit the market this year. There are a number of companies working on smart watches that are currently just an extension of a smartphone. So you'll need to carry a smartphone around for the phone functionality, the phone call part. But all the data will be displayed on this wristwatch. So you can see if you got an alert, you can see if you got an email on your wristwatch, even while you're in a meeting. Nokia is working on bendable phones. Actually, a number of companies are working on bendable phones, so we won't have to carry a big square or rectangle around with us anymore. We'll be able to snap it on. You can wear your connectivity. You can wear your cell phone as a jewelry or a trinket. And Microsoft is in the process of literally turning the phone into light. And the way they're going to do this is with gesture tracking. They'll have a small pendant that you'll wear around your neck, and that pendant will have a computer, the cell phone part in it, and it'll also have a projector. And so you'll speak to it, you use voice command, and you'll say, I need a smartphone, and it'll project it onto your hand. And then as you touch your hand, it'll track the gestures, and it'll see what you're doing, and it'll use that input to dial the phone number, make the connection, surf the web, conduct your email, all of that. So we're literally going to turn the smartphone into light, into pure light. We'll vaporize that. This will all take place over the next 5 years. Now, for the folks who are in the book business, I'm sure you're sitting there going, quaking, thinking, oh gosh, we thought Amazon was bad. I wanted to include this video because not every single thing is going to be vaporized. Take a look at this.
Emma. Huh? Emma.
Not anymore.
Emma.
Every day it's getting on my nerves.
Emma.
Oh, I'm
Emma. Emma.
So there's still room for paper in our future, I think. It's safe to say. But the main message to take away is whatever can be vaporized in your business certainly will be. Either you're going to do it or someone else is going to do it to you. But you must take that away from here. Whatever aspect of your business consists of information, that information will be unbundled. It'll be separated from the physical product, and it will be distributed to digital devices in some fashion. You can choose to do that yourself, or you can choose not to and relinquish that opportunity to someone else who seizes it. So here comes the really geeky takeaway. As goods become more information intensive, they lose the characteristic of physical products, and they begin to resemble services. This is the message I want you to take away. It doesn't mean our businesses have to go away completely. It doesn't mean we're going to be driven out of business. It just means we're not going to be selling physical stuff. We're going to be selling subscription services. Let me give you some examples of this. So certainly the book, we're already familiar with this, right? You guys are experiencing this. The folks in the printing industry are familiar with this. Books are turning into a digital service. Slowly, I know the publishers are doing everything they can to stop this from happening, but all the digital companies are doing everything they can to drag you guys kicking and screaming into the 21st century. Music has already been vaporized. It's been turned into digital services. You don't have to own music anymore. You can have access to everything with a service like Spotify or these other services that I've listed here. And so now a new generation isn't downloading. They're not stealing. They're not creating great big collections of MP3s anymore because they subscribe to a service like this. It's not worth the trouble. Why clutter your hard drive with a bunch of MP3 files when you can subscribe to a service like this for $5 or $6 a month and have access to every song ever recorded? It simply doesn't make any sense to clutter your hard drive. You don't have to be in the business of managing a playlist. Maps have already been vaporized, and I think you'll agree with me that this proves one of the main points. Consumers, people in general, do not shift to a new thing just because it's new. They shift to a new thing because it's better. And until it's significantly better than the previous thing, they won't adapt to it. I travel constantly, and I'm always in the habit of looking at maps. I like to know where I am. I like to know where I'm going. Whenever I get to a hotel, the first thing I ask for is a map, and I say, show me where I am on the map. But now I've started to rely on my smartphone for this because it's simply so much better. With a smartphone, I don't have to ask where I am. I don't have to spend that awkward minute reading a foreign sign and then trying to figure out where on the map I actually am because the smartphone tells me exactly where I am. It tells me how to get to the place I'm going to. It does it so much better, I don't need the map anymore. Boarding cards are being vaporized. You'll see this at airports now all the time. People are walking in and they don't have a paper boarding pass anymore. They just carry their smartphone, they scan it on the barcode scanner. And those boarding passes are being replaced by apps that are actually better. So that piece of paper was a dumb piece of paper. It didn't do anything. You know, once it was printed, it was static and dumb. Now, when you fly, if you're making a connection, and let's say there's some trouble and your flight's a little bit late, and you're worried about making that connecting flight. Well, the minute you land, when they give you permission to turn on your smartphone, you can turn it on, and this app, this is Apple's Passport app, it will tell you what your gate information is, your connecting gate, where your flight will be, and so forth. In other words, you can get that information sooner than the flight attendants on the aircraft, sooner than the people at the gate. So you can actually serve yourself much faster. This is demonstrably better than the previous thing. As I've argued, I think you've gotten this point so far, TV is on the brink of being vaporized as well. Now, TV is already a service. It's a pay TV service. But we're starting to see some new services that give people much more control over what they watch, when they watch it, where they watch it, how long they spend watching it, and so forth on the device of their choice. And these services now have garnered quite a lot of consumer interest. 50 million households will subscribe to these services this year in the United States. 50 million, that's a staggering number. That's half the US households. Really rapid take-up in just a few years. Once you start looking around the economy for things that might be vaporized, you start to see it everywhere. You start to see this trend everywhere. I guarantee you when you leave here tonight, you're going to go, I have another idea for a thing that was vaporized. Good, send those to me. I want to hear about it. Retail is going to get vaporized. In fact, the retailers are quaking in their boots right now because people are walking in with their smartphones. And the smartphone is actually really an awesome thing for retail. It's much better than the computer was because the smartphone has your location information. It knows where you are right at that particular point. It can make all kinds of comparisons for you. It has all your personal identity information. And as I mentioned a minute ago, it's also got your payment information built into it. And so your smartphone is like the ignition key for the real world. You take that around with you, and it gives you all this context-relevant information. And so consumers are walking into shops, and they're doing what they call showrooming, where they look at the store and they scan the item and they use their smartphone to find it cheaper on the internet. I was over in Singapore, and the retailers there were petrified by this phenomenon. On Orchard Road, you know, where they have all those fancy shops, they've got 3 or 4 Chanels. I don't know why they need 3 or 4 Chanel shops, but every one of those retailers said half the people who come in our store have smartphones, and half of them are shopping in another store while they're in our store. What can we do about that? So the vaporization is actually making people who previously weren't merchants. So previously, if you wanted to set up a credit card payment system, it was very cumbersome. You had to have a merchant bank account, you had to have a terminal, you had to have a cash register, and so forth. Now, companies like Square are making it possible just to plug that credit card reader right into your phone. And so even a little shop on the street or a car driver can use this to take credit card transactions, do a credit card swap. So that's very empowering for small businesses. And with NFC, near field communication, it means that you don't necessarily have to even rely on your smartphone. As long as you've set it up, any device with NFC in it. This example shows a BMW car key being used to complete a transaction because that payment information, that identity information is built into your key, and so you can simply swipe that and the transaction will go through from the terminal to your home, to pay payment. This is in Korea. It's kind of amazing. In Korea, in a subway station, they cover the subway stations with glass. In the US, we don't do this, so people fall into the tracks. They're a little smarter about public transport in Korea. So they had these big glass walls in the subway station, and a retailer there, a subsidiary of Tesco, the British grocery chain, the Korean subsidiary there said, gee, how about if we create a virtual store? Let's just put big pictures of all the stuff on our shop shelves on these glass panels. And so when people are waiting for the subway, they can browse across all those things, use their smartphone to snap a photo of it, and they can actually make the transaction, and we'll deliver those products to their home. And so they've turned the subway station into a virtual store. They've vaporized their store. And here you can see they've done the same thing on what was previously just a column in a department store. They've shrunk the store down into a series of pictures that are stuck on that wall, and people are taking pictures. And people really do this. This isn't posed. Okay, medical devices are going to be vaporized. I know, you're going, come on, right? So maybe you've seen this device. It's called a Fitbit. This is a new gizmo that came out a few years ago, I think in 2006 or 7. It's cool. It's a smart thing that you clip onto your shirt or your sleeve. And as you move around all day long, it keeps track of how much motion you do. So if you're trying to lose weight or you want to get back in shape, this is a great way to do it. It almost turns it into a game. You can set a goal. And then at the end of the day, you unclip this thing, plug it into your computer. It'll tell you how many steps you took, how many calories you burned, and so on. So my girlfriend has one of these, and every night she'll say, hey, let's take the dog for a walk because I walked 8,500 steps today, but I want to hit my goal of 10,000, so let's go for one more walk together. So it's good. It works for me as well, right? So it turns fitness into a game. Well, this gizmo, even though it's very tiny and very fun, it too has been vaporized. Here's an iPhone app that's free that you can download to your phone that uses the accelerometer in your phone to replicate that functionality. And so that brand new thing that was so clever and innovative has already been vaporized by a piece of software. This is Scanadu. This is a very small device that you can hold up to your head. It will track your pulse, your body temperature, your blood pressure, and a number of other things. So it's taken a whole bunch of devices and it's shrunk it down into one small device. And I guarantee you this will start to eventually turn into a part that you snap into a smartphone. And here we have a lab on a chip. This is not commercially available. This is coming. This is a prototype that's not yet ready for the mass market. But this is very important. So in parts of the world where they have contagious outbreaks of diseases, think of the Congo, for instance. If a doctor is out in the field, out in the bush, and he discovers that somebody's really sick, he'll take a blood sample or tissue sample, but they usually have to put those samples on a helicopter, and they have to do it pretty quickly. And get them, they fly back to Kinshasa or some other big city where there's a lab, and then they'll run some tests. 24 hours later, they get the results, and they have to get the information back, or the medicine back out to the jungle where the doctors happen to be. With this system, what you can do is swipe that little thing that's plugged into the smartphone, and it does the analysis right there. They've taken all of that laboratory and shrunk it down to a little tiny thing that plugs into your cell phone. And so this is called a lab on a chip. It's astonishing, and this is coming soon. So it's almost here. It's almost here. Oh yeah. Automobiles are going to be vaporized too. I know. You're saying, come on, Rob, how can it be? How can it possibly be? Go with me here for a second. Okay, so you know that we struggle today to customize our cars, right? No car seems to have the right GPS system for everybody. And so we kind of Velcro tape our smartphone or our iPad onto the dashboard, hoping that we can customize it and get exactly the right map service that we wish to have on our car. And it's clunky and it doesn't quite work. So car manufacturers are smart. They've seen this trend now, and they're starting to adapt to it. So here's an example. I think this is from Ford Motor Company, and it's a smartphone app that talks to you about the status of your car. Here's an example from Nissan. It allows you to control your car remotely. So say, for instance, on a hot day, you could roll down the windows or turn on the AC even when you're away from your car just by using that app, which if you think about it, you go, that's pretty smart, but come on, that hasn't really vaporized the car. No, that's just the very beginning. What you can start to see, though, is cars. These are cars on the market today are now talking to our smartphones. So when you walk into the car, you kind of bring all your media with you. You bring all your information with you. And if you're streaming music from Spotify, in this case, it's a service called AHA, MOG, all these digital streaming services, they simply pick up automatically once you walk into the car, and the car starts streaming the music that was on your phone. And so in a weird way, you can kind of bring all your stuff with you when you're leaving it all behind. It's pretty clear to me that the next step is going to be downloading apps to cars. You'll be able to actually simply get rid of the phone in the middle and just download stuff directly to the car and customize the dashboard entirely. That's the next frontier. And so the car will become the next mobile computing platform. And once that happens, the cars will all talk to each other. And we'll start to see the cars take on the responsibility for driving, mapping, get us to the destination on time, observing laws, watching out for other traffic, and so forth. And we've already started to see this happen in California, where I live. Google has worked with the state legislature to pass a law that allows them to drive robot vehicles, autonomous vehicles that drive themselves. They're robot cars. They're safer than human-driven cars. In fact, there's video on the web that I could show you of these things that can do. They can drive like a stunt driver, and they can execute the same move perfectly every time. So they can go flying around and then park, like swoop right into the parking spot. And they can execute that like a robot every single time, perfectly, time after time. So they're quite safe. But that said, it's going to take 10 years or more before this rolls out because there's a lot of law in place. And there's a lot of question about liability. If someone's in a car accident, who's responsible? The robot, the manufacturer, the driver, a series of questions that'll have to be settled through a long, painful litigation process. Very characteristic of the way we introduce technology in the United States. And so, but yet these robot cars are coming. They are a fact. They're here. Every major automotive manufacturer has robot cars in the works. And I believe in the future, when you want a car, you won't go out to the parking lot anymore. You'll simply use your smartphone or whatever the thing in the future that's replaced the smartphone is, and you'll say, I need a car. I need to get from here to there. You'll say what destination, and a few minutes later, you'll get a message that your robot car is waiting for you. It'll be automobiles as a service. We will go from purchasing this major product, $20,000 or $30,000 product, and we're going to shift to subscribing to a service. You're starting to see that already with car sharing services and bike sharing services. Everywhere you go now in Europe, there are bike sharing services that have popped up. In the US, we have Zipcar across the country. It's a car sharing service. And there are other types of services like that, Airbnb for sharing rooms and so forth. So this sharing economy is a new trend. I think it's quite likely this is the future of automotive, is that you won't be a driver anymore. You'll simply be a subscriber to a car service that will take you from place to place. And actually, that's great because we'll be using our smartphones to consume more media, to communicate more. You know, we'll be doing things with that traffic time that we couldn't do very safely when we drive. So in summary, I think it's actually pretty easy to predict the future. If you take everything that I've just talked about and walk out of here with a couple of ideas, just 2 things to take away today. The first one is ask yourself, what part of my business consists of information? And can that information be liberated from the physical form? Can it be separated from the physical product? And if so, who's going to do that? Am I going to do that? Or is my competitor or some startup company that I've never even heard of, are they going to liberate that information? That's a question for you to think about. The second part of that question is, how can my physical product turn into a service? How can I shift from selling products to getting people to subscribe to a service? Because that is truly the future. And remember that whatever can be vaporized will be vaporized. So that is the future of mobile media, and I believe it's a future that covers an awful lot of fields. I'd be happy to take your questions and comments if you wish. I think we're going to do that now, right? Okay, great. Thank you very much for your time and attention today. I appreciate it.